Right, so we'll do it. All right, so as the common law shows, you have to begin, then people will just follow the voice and they will appear from nowhere. More people. So my name is Mark Lipovetsky. I'm a professor of Slavic languages here at Columbia, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Pavel Lembersky's new novel, which you can see on the screen, and copies are surrounding us, and you have a flyer, 200 brand new shiny Cadillacs. I'm assuming that you know who Pavel is, but I will use my sort of privilege of being a moderator and will rehearse his biographic facts. So Pavel was born and grown in Odessa, sort of the city famous by its literary genealogists, not only literary, of course. He enrolled first at the Odessa College of Refrigerators and Food Industry, known as alma mater of Zhvanetsky, Ilchenko, and Karsov, among other things. So it's also sort of a literary and artistic place. He emigrated to the United States in 1977, and while having different career experiences, he first got educated in comparative literature at the University of California, Berkeley, where he studied and so had a chance to study under Czeslaw Milosz, René Girard, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Michel Foucault, and other big thinkers. He, for his undergraduate thesis, Pavel wrote a work on the concept of polyphony, Bakhtinian concept of polyphony in the Brothers Karamazov. It's yours, not mine. I
No,
switch
it's
mine
not
off.
mine either.
Mine is off. Oh no, mine is not off. I'm sorry. So, and Faulkner's The Snobs trilogy. After that, in the mid-80s, Pavel studied film theory and production at San Francisco State University, and he is the author of multiple works in moving pictures genres, I would say, right, from MTV clips based on Oedipus, right, if I'm not mistaken.
There was an effort.
Yeah, on Oedipus. Which is an achievement by itself, I would say, right? So
Short and sweet.
yeah, so I would say the shortest Oedipus in the world history, perhaps. And then he also contributed to important Oscar-winning projects, including the appointment of Dennis Jennings and a few others. For the novel, it is quite important that Pavel spent 2 years as a businessman, if I understand correctly. But you will talk later about this. I will ask you about that.
Upon request.
There will be a request. In Russia during the tumultuous 90s, and then he returned to the United States, and now he is a co-host of the musical radio show, and he also curated several art shows and regularly writes about art in New York. And of course, he is a very active publishing author of 3 novels. Counting this or not counting?
Let's count this one.
With this, it's 3.
Including
this one, right? And a number of collections of short fiction. And as I already said, some of these books can be found on this wonderful table. I don't know how many people in the audience read the novel, and it is a challenge to speak about it, because on the one hand I read it,
yes.
But I understand that it has very many sort of plot twists, which I would like not to betray to the readers who don't want to steal your thunder.
It's all right. There's plenty. Where it came from.
Still away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Still away.
Right. And The novel is published, as you may have noticed from the flyer, by Academic Studies Press, which is not sort of famous by its fiction publication, but it is sort of taking this market, and hopefully Pavel will open new perspectives in this wonderful press where I publish myself, and it's also pretty famous by its anthological series of different volumes of poetry, prose, essays in translation, and a big Jewish series. So I'm indeed very happy that Pavel's new novel appeared in this very press, right? And I hope that since this press is always represented at Slavic conventions, there will be a chance perhaps to speak about it there, and Slavists will definitely enjoy this. So Pavel, if I may ask you first, I would like to ask you about the genre of this novel. So for those who haven't read it, the novel consists technically of three parts, but the third part, I would say, it's some kind of the epilogue, right? Some kind of wrapping. So the first part is adventurous / satirical / as I can guess, partially autobiographic story of the protagonist named accidentally Mark, adventures in Moscow around 1993. Right? And lots of things are happening here. He goes to Moscow to retrieve $200,000 that he lost doing business with Russian businessmen in the United States, which explains the title of the novel, because that's exactly the business deal that made poor Mark even more poor than he was before this business deal.
Yeah.
All right. So that's one part, and it's written in very elaborate, very I would say spicy, dialogue-rich style, and looks, as I said, at Moscow in the 90s. The second part is written in completely different style. It almost doesn't have dialogues except for the final part, and it tells the story of the film director, producer, Greg Davis, American, as you can guess, but of Russian Jewish descent, and it is sort of built as the interview that Mark, upon the request of one character, runs with the relative of this character. And it's written in a completely different style. It's written as very, I would say, transparent and almost, I would say, script-like story of this personage, of this character, his adventures, his career, etc. Right, and what's very important that this character, this Greg Davis, disappeared without trace sometimes in the 80s, and his last known film is from 1946. From the 1940s, right? So there is some kind of mystery surrounding his last years and his magic, or not magic, disappearance. Right, and then the last part, sort of, it brings these two stories together. As you can see, I'm doing my best not to say anything at all. And this last part is partially, sorry for tautology, allegorical, partially fantasy-like, right? And it's completely different style of writing. So I can see here three styles, three more or less separate stories. Let's not count the third one. Right. Two separate stories. So I have a suspicion that you had two concepts, two ideas, two stories, and then you decided to put them together, and you did this very interestingly and very skillfully. But am I right? If I am wrong, and if it was the initial sort of design to put these two stories together? So I'm returning to my question: what is the genre of your novel?
That's a good question. My publisher's marketing team, I would be referring to them a lot because this is first time ever I have a marketing team to talk about. So they do describe it as a polygeneric, multi-genre type of text, and not so much because it's separated into three different parts, but because it blends satire, it blends realism, it blends kind of day-to-day adventures of the character in Moscow in the early 90s. And then there is quite a bit of film discourse and biographical information on the missing director. And then the third part is indeed written, it's a kind of a fantasy part, whether it's a dream or some kind of. Also, it was described as a book that deals with multiverses. That was that was a term new to me, but I guess my marketing team is a bit younger and they're probably better read in more contemporary works of speculative fiction and science fiction. So they applied that term. As far as the style, yes, there are also, even though the situation where my character finds himself in Moscow in the early 90s lends itself to crime mystery genre, because Volans, Nolans, you kind of have to apply that because of the rampant crime and complete uncertainty of life in Moscow in the 90s, the reforms that actually created a new class of oligarchs, as we well know, the shock therapy perpetrated by Yeltsin team with the help of Harvard School of Economics, and a partial blame for what's, what do they call it? The situation in Russia, the crime-infested politics in Russia, the blame for it is assigned by the big bad guy, and he's a prominent figure in the book, an otherworldly character who appears on the cover of the book, and Ouroboros, standing for eternity. He holds his tail into his in his mouth. So he says that it was him who hooked up Yeltsin's economists with Harvard School of Economics, and the result is, is unfolding in front of the character's eyes, because the first meeting of the main character and the dark one happens in Moscow, Novy Arbat, Stary Arbat, rather. So that kind of lends itself to noir stylistically, but I decided to refrain from doing the wall-to-wall neo-noir kind of book. For one thing, it takes quite a bit more familiarity with noir than I have at my fingertips. I mean, a good example would be a noir book called Noir by the late great Robert Hoover. He called one of his last novels Noir, and that happens to be the name of the detective in the book, in his novel. So there are increments of noir. The dialogue sometimes is noir-like, snappy. The metaphors are not as outlandish as they would get, let's say, in Raymond Chandler or other practitioners of noir. I'm reading currently Goodbye, My Lovely by Chandler, and there is a campaign. I mean, the guy, Philip Marlowe, lights his fifth cigarette of the morning, and he didn't like the taste of it at all. Chandler says it tasted like plumber's handkerchief, which is kind of an outlandish. We know what he means by that, but it's kind of a far-fetched metaphor. I don't indulge in those, flashy metaphors, but there are elements of noir as well, and there are quite a few references to Beckett in the book. So the last part is kind of done in the poor man's Beckett kind of style. Syntax gets a little convoluted, There are no punctuation marks, and so on and so forth. So there's those three elements, maybe more. To me, first and foremost, it's a love story, and there is a situation with Noel from the Orpheus and Eurydice's story, and there are actually a few Eurydice in the book. His character's former wife kind of, beckons him into the past and kind of wouldn't let him go. And his new love, a Moscow girl named Tasha, is also he also has to travel into the past, whether it's a fantasy or it's happening for real. We don't know. I personally don't know. But so there are multiple Eurydices. And speaking very, very loosely, it's also kind of a riff on the Master and Margarita, not so much because there is a dark one in the book, but there are. The girl, the main character, falls in love in Moscow, is of course crazy about the Master and Margarita, and the big bad guy says that he's read better books than that, but he knows the status of the book and how it's quoted by every Russian of all, young and old.
Every literature.
Yeah, plus the girl, literature, plus the little kitty that Natasha owns is called Behemoth as well, as in Bulgakov. So there are all these little nods to the Master Margarita, which was not by any means a master text behind it. There is a gimmick as what's her name, Siani Ngao, the scholar from Chicago University, wrote a book about gimmicks, how they are completely prevalent in late capitalism, and any novel, so it's not a pejorative term, it's just what you do. So the gimmick in my book is in fact the magic skin, which happens to be, of course, the Balzac's book, but also it's the first movie, the breakthrough movie that our missing film director breakthrough in New York Silence in the 1920s, was an adaptation of the Wild Ass's Skin by Balzac, only he transposed the action from 1830s Paris to prohibition-ridden New York of the 1920s. So there's that device which is used. So, when I list, literature in my acknowledgement, I mention a few books in Hollywood because there is this, it happens, I draw on that for the second part of the book, the narrative that the sister of the missing director is relating, and the main guy is recording it because upon completion of that project, he would be paid $200,000, which he otherwise was unable to take out of Moscow, $10,000 being the limit you are allowed to take out of the country in the 90s. Perhaps it still is the same. Be that as it may, there are all these
That's right, I would say.
right. So, so it's to me, it's a love story, but there are tons and tons of adventures. I wasn't really following any adventure books. For one thing, as I try to think back on the library at my parents' place in Odessa, we didn't really have that many adventure books on our shelves. We had All the Russians, and we had Dreiser, we had Hugo, we had Dickens. We did not have Mind Read. I was not familiar with Bret Harte. So adventure story is not necessarily what I would read if I had all the time in the world. It would probably be I don't know, maybe a man of without qualities by Musil rather than Bret Harte. However, I found myself being absolutely thanking myself, if I could indulge in saying that, because when you read your book for about 150 times and 40 of them going through copy edit with the editor and proofreading it with editor another 40 times, it better hold some interest to the author, because otherwise you'd be bored to tears. You know it like the palm of your hand. And I found myself surprised at a lot of times, because I simply I could not recall right away all the twists and turns that happen in the book, because things evolve. And both the Moscow of the 90s and the 20s, New York in the 20s, 1920s, I'm thinking of the movie Man in Black part 2, where the characters travel in time and they found themselves in Andy Warhol's factory downtown, and then they find themselves in during the launch of Apollo 13. So if you do your time traveling, you better hit those significant memorable moments. And it seems to also apply to someone who recollects his past. The person who my character interviews is 92 or 93, so he is talking about events that took place 50 or more like 70 years ago, because they left Russia during the Civil War. The director's family, the future Hollywood director's family, who's missing. So he also, or she, his sister, also recalls what's significant, and that is prohibition, and that is so-called Red Scare 1, where bombs were exploding all over town in the 1920s, including the huge Wall Street explosion with a horse-driven cart loaded with horseshoes, exploded, and horseshoes turned into shrapnel. Windows were broken at Stanley Morgan, and so on and so forth. There were no victims, but people were deported from New York en masse as a result of that. So there's Red Scare 1, and also there is a McCarthyism in Hollywood, which the director became sort of tangentially involved with. And so that was the Red Scare 2. So the part 1 and part 2 are unified in, historically. If there's Red Scare 1, there's Red Scare 2. Also, the Ouroboros guy unites the seemingly unrelated first part and second part, because our guy, Mark Neider, and I chose his name not just because my grandma's maternal grandma name was Neiderke, but also to me it kind of was a significant name, kind of going back to Neider meaning nothing, like the mark of the absence, to not to indulge in Derridian kind of tangents here, but he is an absent, he is the presence of the absence. He is missing at the scene of the crime, where his girlfriend volunteers to accompany his bodyguards to retrieve the money and raid the apartment of the mafia person who gypped him out of $200,000. He is not a particularly proactive persona, except for the last part of the book, which he tries to do something heroic. We don't really know if he achieved it, but he certainly, tries to do something life-threatening to himself. So I don't know if it answered any of your questions, but it's
But you answered many other questions, including those that I didn't have yet.
Right.
But I will ask some others.
Sure.
So you destroyed my entire plan, of course.
Absolutely.
But thank you very much. It was a very interesting answer. So I read your novel as a sort of more or less traditional postmodernist novel, which is an oxymoron in itself. So, but since postmodernism exists for at least 50 years, maybe more so, then it becomes a form of tradition, right? And there are many sort of not parallels, analogies that one can bring up, beginning with, I don't know, Foucault Pendulum by Umberto Eco,
Right.
and Pelevin's novels come to mind, especially with the Ouroboros thing. Sometimes it's a little bit Sorokin-esque. So you definitely sort of inscribe your novel into this big tradition, and I think it will be read in this context. But you mentioned the historical context, and especially quite interesting for me. You were speaking, and the novel is also sort of reflective of that, about American context. While in Russian chapters, so you have Russian and American chapters, obviously, the things are happening around 93, around this sort of coup d'état attempt, failed coup d'état, and the shelling of parliament buildings, of all famous events, which you just mentioned, but you never go into any kind of detail. And I'm pretty sure that the American reader will not sort of have a clear picture of what was going on. But obviously, you don't need that, right? So my question here is that why did you need Russia of the 90s, except for your probably personal experience and sort of memories of that, and except for the sort of the wild land of adventures that this situation sort of creates, motivirovka, as Russian formers would say. So what is for you in the 90s? Because as you know, the 90s are a very contentious territory. Sort of, on the one hand, it has been heavily demonized by the Putin propaganda, and sort of basically served as the reason for the new totalitarianism and sort of justification. Do we want to go back into the 90s? Not, of course. Then you may have what we have now, right? Yeah. On the other hand, there is a opposite trend, the idealization of the 90s, sort of think about 90s as the time of complete freedom and complete freedom to self-realize, and sort of lost opportunities, lost utopian, even sometimes land, islands, right? So what's your take on the 90s?
My personal take on the 90s was that, to me, as someone who, just like my character, quit his programming job, not like my Mark Neider, I formed a business company with a British national who was the sole. That's, anecdotal, but it's a background which perhaps is more exciting than the book itself. What happened is that a friend of mine quit his job at Anka, which is a global multi-billion corporation, and he was they build all over the place. They were building heavily in Moscow in the 90s, early 90s. They renovated Petrovsky Passage, did lots and lots of work in the 90s, and he was the sole representative of the company here in New York. Yeah, the company provided him with a beautiful apartment with a built-in fish tank, which I was personally very impressed with. Company sponsored built-in fish tank, a Mercedes that he parked across the street from his place on 6th Avenue and Sixth Avenue of the Americas and Third Avenue. So he quit his job. I quit my programming job, which was very modestly remunerated, but he quit a serious job to form a company with me. He was a seasoned businessman. I was a programmer. We weren't particularly successful in the wilderness of Moscow of the early 90s, but to me, it was a series, other than business setbacks that I experienced throughout the year and a half that we lived there, incidentally renting a place from the late Alexander Lipnitsky, the founder of Zvukimo band. His nanny rent. Yeah, I mean, the woman who actually brought him up, and his brother, she vacated to their dacha and let us live and pay for their 3 or 4 room apartment in Starokonyushny, which is incidentally where I settled my love interest, Tasha, in the book. She also lives in Tarkanish, perhaps in our apartment. I don't know. Haven't checked. Probably it was Nest Sprawling when Tasha was concerned. So we stayed there for a year and a half. Then the money ran out. We moved to Philly. Paid a lot less in started, but it was the most traumatic experience for me because that was my first reacquaintance with the culture. I had been living in the States by that time for about 15 years. I graduated Berkeley. Whatever writing I did was screenwriting, and that was in English. All of a sudden, in Moscow, I started first efforts to write prose occurred, during those enormously long breaks between unsuccessful business deals. I had all the time in the world, and I started writing and took my first stories to Sola, a magazine run by Alexander Mikhailov, and the editorial board included Bitov and Popov. So they published it. That was my debut. And I remember talking to this theater director, Koля Sheiko, Nikolai Sheiko, he passed away about 5 years ago. And I mentioned that I'm writing like crazy for no apparent reason. He said, "This is the debt, Pasha. This is the debt you're paying back." I didn't know what the hell a debt to who, to culture, to language. But anyhow.
Were you writing in Russian?
I was writing in Russian at the time, living in Moscow and Starerbat, filling those pages upon pages, actually using 2 fingers typing on the typewriter we purchased for our business proposals and stuff. So that was the businessman turned writer back then. And the confrontation with culture, confrontation with language, and with people was a little too much. So 90s to me, apart from the political turmoil, the shock therapy that created the class of oligarchs and plunged 75% of Russian population into poverty, 75% live below the poverty line. At the time, rampant inflation. At some point, the guy tries to feed the turnstile in Moscow metro, and he remembers, using petak when he was a kid, 5 kopecks, and so he says something that now the feed went up 600 times. So it's like he's trying to fish, I don't know.
That was after denomination, when they cut two zeros from.
It was after. It was 1993 when the action takes
And
place.
denomination was earlier.
Probably earlier, yeah. I remember prices were absolutely staggering, and the ruble were just free fall. And of course, I witnessed the coup, which was seriously traumatic. And to me, writing the book and putting everything in the 90s is not just the picaresque kind of background that I wanted my characters to act and fall in love against. It's something that was very real. It's something that was happening. And since I've never seen any military action in my entire life, never served in the Soviet army or American army, that was the closest I ever got to a military action. And the windows in our Starokonyushny apartment were rattling because we were about 5 blocks from the White House while it was shelled by tanks upon Yeltsin's orders. And curfew and people among soldiers wielding semi-automatic. It was all very real and extremely traumatic. So I didn't even have to do much research because I knew it was imprinted in my brain very well. My parents were very happy when I came back in one piece. And as I observed in Белый Кролик, the White Rabbit, where I did a presentation a few last week, I said I didn't make a killing, but I also didn't wind up the kill. I returned in one piece, not particularly wealthy, but enjoying my good health. And that was 30 years ago. It's by far not the only book written 30 years after the fact. I'm thinking of
War and Peace.
War and Peace, for one thing. He was a babe in arms.
It's more than 30.
More than 30. But also there is Jules and Jim, Truffaut based his famous film upon, written by, I think his name is Rouge, Pierre Rouge. He wrote about the events of the First War in the late 50s. So we're talking, and he remembered, so did I. So taking sides, of course, I mean, I was happy to get out of it. Now that I read on it, perhaps I should have done a little more research, but then there is no room in the book for generalization and sort of post factum contextualization, because my narrator relates this story in 1993. He was witnessing it, and there is no Tolstoyan kind of epilogue, running about this 70 pages talking about the movement of the masses, this and that. I, for one, was a part of the movement of the masses, движуха, quote unquote, because everyone and his uncle who came to the United States all of a sudden packed up their things, forgot everything that they love to quote about freedom, democracy, a mom and dad and apple pie, and went back to Russia to make a quick buck because opportunities were opening. Same goes for quite a few people in the arts. I can name at least 2 film directors. One is Tasha, the other one is Stasik, who, after graduating Columbia Film School, went there and started making movies because, unlike myself, who was pushing 30, working for Jonathan Demme and literally bringing sandwiches to the assistant of the assistant editor, waiting for my lucky break, which, who knows, would have never come had I stuck with it, or maybe would have come when I was pushing 40 already. I was sort of I entered that game a little too late and too long in the tooth. But so there isn't much research. There could have been more research. For one thing, the book is dedicated to the memory of my cousin Valery Semyonovsky, who is a theater critic and playwright. He passed on a year and a half ago, at the age of 72. He was the editor of Theater magazine, Moscow Observer, one of the best theater magazine in Moscow. And as such, I mean, I'm talking about Stanislavski's touring New York and United States in the 20s, and I could have just reached, for Valeri's magazine on my shelf, because in one of the issues, or several issues of Moscow Observer theater magazine, that he ran in the 90s. There are quite a few articles on Stanislavski's troupe tour of the United States. I didn't even bother to do that, but my research was a lot more thorough when I dealt with the 20s. I read quite a bit, trying to sort of recreate New York of the 20s.
So, thank you very much. May I move to the second part and to the next question? And I promise to shut down soon with my questions and let Pavel read from his novel. Maybe that would be even more exciting. So forgive me my ignorance, but I assume that Greg Davis is a fictional figure.
Absolutely. Not only is he a fictional figure, every single movie that I describe, some of them more elaborate than others,
Yes,
are non-existent.
I checked. I didn't find any.
Yeah,
Right. Unlike your character, I have internet at my
they did not
fingertips.
back in the day.
Yeah,
Right.
I understood the motivation for
Right.
93,
Right.
not to have Wikipedia at hand. But obviously, so this character cannot be invented from scratch, and I assume that there were some patches, bits and pieces borrowed from various filmic or maybe theatrical biographies. Am I right or am I wrong? Or is it completely?
It's completely inventive.
Completely inventive.
Yes, and I was first. I named him Zach Davis, but Anna Kostensova, so should be here. She teaches Columbia. She was one of the first editors of the book. She brought to my attention that the character who came to New York in 1920s wouldn't have been called Zach. It's something of the 80s and 90s, maybe of Thomas Pynchon fiction, and definitely not. So I renamed him Greg Davis, and he was Gershel in the old country. because he comes from a small town, and
But he could have been Zahar in the old country.
he could have been Zahar. Who I did use for his initial sort of theater involvement in the old country was my grandfather, Yakov Bensonovich Lembersky, who actually in Khristinovka, before he became a businessman, had to take care of his family, my father's sister. He was involved in theater. He was, in fact, just like my character, writing out parts for all-male ensemble of that provincial theater group, and his father, who ran a store. So would it be my great grandfather? He would find his writing and tear it up. He was against his son's theatrical proclivities from the get-go. So this is definitely based on initial, and also the same goes for the train and train station, which is the bit of the is going to be it's a part of the excerpt that I'm going to read. All of a sudden, Khristinovka became like a train stop type of little place, and whatever stories, bedtime stories, my grandfather told my real life grandfather told my father and my father's sister, my aunt, had to do with train and train station, no matter what happened. Magic wand, seven dwarfs, there had to be a train station in the fairy tale. So that I use that for the book. And if you don't really use your family when you're writing a historical bit, it does not really resonate. I mean, why do it? I mean, you do something, you draw on your family lore, which I did quite a bit. So he's fictitious, but then there are elements of my family.
Neider.
Yes.
I remember our conversation, how many, 6 or maybe even 7 years ago, when and actually I'm very grateful for mentioning of my acknowledgments.
Turn me on to
I know this. Thank you.
Yeah.
When we were talking about the tricksters, which is the subject of my research,
Yeah.
and so this question may sound a little sort of egotistic, but your novel is oversaturated by tricksters. At least 3 characters can be counted as such, and 2 of them belong to such rare breed as female trickster and queer trickster.
Yeah.
So what do tricksters mean for you and for your novel?
Well, trickster is a kind of character who can step out of his role. He can sort of start speaking in tongues. He can go through all kinds of transformation, not necessarily physical, but sometimes even physical. I mean, for one thing, Sloterdijk, the book that you kindly suggested and I loved, and I'm going to use Sloterdijk's other books for my next book because in his more recent books, he talks about geometry, spheres, and so. And I do want to talk about spheres and stereometry and geometry quite a bit in my next book. Also do it sort of with a gentle touch because I'm not writing a scholarly book, but a book of fiction is what my trade is. Mephistopheles is certainly a huge presence, a cynic par excellence, and so is my dark one. And also, I was drawn. I mean, he had to be a trickster, and to me, it's fun. I mean, all this tradition of Chichikov, Bender, Western tradition. I was on a plane. I went to Europe after like 5 years of abstinence, and on my flight back, I out of like 300 selections. There were only 25 last time I flew. All of a sudden, it's 300 movies you can choose from. So I chose Beetlejuice, the original Beetlejuice, which I saw about 3 times when it came out in 1985. Not only is it full of memes that mean a lot to culture, it meant quite a bit to me, and I was already 30 when I saw it, and I fell in love with it. And I'm watching that movie on a plane, and I realized that my bad guy is quite indebted to Beetlejuice. He talks a lot. He can, flip around on a dime. He does nasty things. He's cynical, of course. He's uh, sexually very active, and I'm not sure. Well, my dark one is probably too.
Yeah,
So-
but your Tasha is also a trickster.
Tasha is a trickster,
And
yeah.
your Greg Davis is also a trickster.
And he's also a trickster. Tasha, for one, is female. Ladies who read the book, editors said that she's such a charming, winning character. She certainly could have used more lines than I had given her, but she talks quite a bit and she says pretty funny and sharp things, and that's where the noir kind of register kicks in when Tasha speaks. And you mentioned that indeed you're right in saying that this is a traditional postmodernist. Perhaps I'm a little cautious using postmodernism has been used.
It's too late.
It's too late.
You may use it.
Okay, I may use it. It's been canonized. I've been trying to write a traditional novel with quite a bit happening by way of the plot, and also creating believable characters. The only thing is that one of the characters is a pathological liar, which is Tasha. I mean, she says things that never mentions things that never happen. She invents situations, and the novel being traditional, I kind of try to tie up all the loose ends at the end and explain quite a bit, but quite a few things are not explained because I simply didn't know how to. So I guess it's left a little bit open-ended, but more than that, to me, they are what makes reading exciting, because they can turn around. They don't normally do that much. I mean, they're not psychotic like they would be in mid-career Godard, or they're not manic like they're in the entire Dostoevsky's body of work, but they don't do outlandish things. Most of the outlandish things happen because of the plot twists. So they are believable and natural. They behave naturally, more or less, except for the dark guy who's like all over the place. And
What about Greg Davis?
Greg Davis is also a liar.
A liar, and even more so.
Absolutely. People who know their film would notice not that it's important at all, but he starts telling his story, and he knows that the guy who interviews him is a former film student. So he says that she says that his sister, that she hung with Maya Deren, and at the time in the 20s, of course, Maya Deren, asks the director's sister, and the guy says, yes, of course I know Maya Deren. Who doesn't? The thing is, Maya Deren in the 20s were like a babe in arms. She was like 3 years old. She couldn't have possibly, hung out in the village with the main character. So there are a lot of little things that will not be picked up on by the readers, but at least they are there for me.
But the final explanation is coming from two fetuses.
Yes.
Which is the most realistic thing I could ever imagine.
When Maxim Schreier, the editor, the acquiring editor of
the
this,
conversation of two fetuses happening.
He told me that he's never. It's probably pretty novel, pretty innovative, because he's never read anything like it, and I'm not sure if he was referring to the faulty magic device. The magic skin does what she's asked to do, but sometimes she misinterprets the wish, which creates all kinds of iffy situations. I don't know if Maxim was referring to that, or in fact he was talking about the dialogue between two fetuses, feti.
I don't know how.
And me neither. We have to let him. Latins,
But still about
still alive,
still
but
about
died.
that was
So the main guy finally has a heart-to-heart with
so you know what we mean,
yeah.
basically.
So they have this conversation with his wife, and they're both fetuses in his mother's womb. And among other things, they're talking about Ukraine giving up her nuclear weapons. It happens within the character's mother's womb.
Yeah. So that will be
that.
I want to emphasize. Right. Okay. Thank you. I think that you created a wonderful intrigue, and now people would, those who haven't read it yet, and the pleasure is ahead of them, would like probably to hear a fragment from you.
I can read the fragment. It's historical. So the guy goes to Moscow to retrieve his the money the bad guys owe him, and he falls in love. And then he has to get his money back in the States. He has to interview a sister of a film director who left Russia during the Civil War. And this is the historical part where actually the director's family, his teenage sister who relates this story, first encounter the bad guy, the big bad guy, the Ouroboros, otherworldly devil, whatever. So the dark-eyed gentleman in uniform who shared our compartment, I believe we were on a train to Romania, unless it was already after we crossed the Belgian border, was running a mild fever, and Greg, who tried to befriend him, offered him a cigarette. Greg preferred to roll his own, and they stepped out for a smoke, though Mother, being Mother, said, "Maybe you shouldn't, young man, you seem under the weather." But the soldier said it mattered little to him. In fact, tobacco was known for its medicinal power, at least in some instances, and you didn't have to be a Cherokee to subscribe to that theory. And if that doesn't work, he said, he had a much stronger medicine in his bag, a panacea, if you will. I didn't know what panacea meant. I thought it was some kind of alcoholic beverage. There was a ring on his little finger, too. The guy's a Mason, Greg, that's the director, future director, whispered into my ear, "Get a load of his signet ring." I nodded, pretending I knew what that was. A Mason? I think there was a compass engraved on his ring, maybe a sphinx's head, maybe not, some writing in Latin too, the things that stay with you. At first, the lieutenant was not too talkative. Was he being shy, or did the slight yet pronounced lisp impede his speech to the point of making him reticent? I don't know, and I don't remember much from that encounter other than how it ended. Dramatic does not begin to describe it. Our first encounter outside the Russian Empire, too outrageous for words. When Mother whispered, "Rosie, offer the man some knishes and a piece of apple strudel," I did just that, and he opened up a bit. Actually, he began by asking himself, mostly addressing Grandpa, who had a knack for instilling confidence in strangers and friends alike. Was it his white beard of a sage, his whooping cough that almost got him in trouble on Ellis Island, or his frequent and seemingly random quotes from the Torah? But he certainly commanded respect without even trying. Never one to talk to strangers himself, often coming across as reserved and not entirely friendly, Grandpa was not the chatty type. The nickname he went by in our family was Chatterbox Ben, though his real name was Ben Zion. I recall the bedtime stories he liked to tell Gershel and me when we were little, and no matter how they ended, his tales always involved a train or a train station. A short left, he's transcribing the, so he inserts reactions. Do you want to know why? The village he came from had recently added a new feature, a train station where trains were scheduled to stop twice a week. The new development certainly put Hristinovka on the map and gave its inhabitants a sense of purpose and brought work. Sort of like the invention of the movies provided jobs for thousands and a pastime for millions. Only Chatterbox Ben was a storytelling engine all by himself. Anyhow, the train and the station became the kernel of the stories Chatterbox Ben improvised so readily and inventively. I wonder if it might also account for trains being a prominent feature in several of Greg's pictures, almost to the exclusion of other locations in two of them. I'm referring to, firstly, A Train to Rena and Voyages in the Night. Be that as it may, making up stories for our fellow passenger as he went along was a cinch for Grandpa, like telling the lieutenant tall tales about our final destination being Brazil, etc. You're kidding me, right? Why Brazil? What's in Brazil? You have people in Brazil? Asked, I can't think of his name right now, but it didn't seem that the lieutenant bought the Grandpa's Brazil story. Yes, distant relatives, plus the climate, business prospects, and a sizable Jewish community. One has to rely on his own kind, at least initially. What about you? I am being extradited, the lieutenant said matter-of-factly. So my journey is very much one way too. What happened? Grandpa said, I hope I'm not meddling in someone else's affairs. I feel peculiar talking about it, the man said, shrugging. But since we don't stand a chance of ever seeing each other again, why the hell not? Strangers on a train often do. I mean, share stories. The main reason I was part of the group that assassinated the Tsar and his family. A pregnant silence fell upon the entire compartment. Greg and I did a double take. It even felt for a moment like the train came to a stop, but it did not. Something inside of me did. Not directly, never pulled the trigger, he continued, but I was a part of Nicholas II's escort, tasked with making sure he and his kin got to Yekaterinburg safely, his retinue too. So after everything was over and the royal blood spilled in the Ipatiev house basement, I was given two choices: leave the country to the suite or be executed on the spot. A tall order that. Nobody wanted any witnesses around, though. Then the lieutenant started insisting in a loud whisper that Lenin was actually a German spy. The lieutenant personally had never had any doubts about that. So the lieutenant was in fact an indirect victim of greater circumstances. Aren't we all? Chimed in father, who was rolling his eyes behind the stranger's back and making circles around his temple with his forefinger, indicating to mother that he thought the soldier had a few screws loose. Oh yes, though some to a much greater degree than the rest, the lieutenant rattled on. But now that the toppling of the provisional government by the Germans was a fait accompli, because losing the war was a tough pill to swallow, and the coup was nothing if not Germany's way of getting back on Russia and Europe, doesn't it change your way of thinking? Knowing that it normally takes two to tango, or scream bloody murder, whichever the case may be. I mean, one does the screaming, the Menshevik gets his throat slit, not to mention the reparations are a pittance when your newly expanded territory encompasses a huge empire rich in resources that spans half of Europe and 2/3 of Asia. Now that the Habsburgs and the Ottomans are not on the map anymore, the crescent for the full moon, you call it fair, and I saw what happened to the Romanovs with my own eyes. Anyhow, as he was trying to put across, though not without difficulty, he was not a part of the firing squad. He was guarding the Tsar and his family. That's all he did. Also assisting Botkin, who was the royal family doctor. He was never put on trial or attempted to be gotten rid of. Lenin's orders or no Lenin's orders. The victims, the bloody deed, in the basement, blood streaming, bullets bouncing off the princesses who had diamonds sewn in their clothing. He saw the whole thing. Damn his eyes. So whether he was exaggerating the role of Germany in the revolution or not, he continued, Germany was affected by the diminished stature of Russia because of the war and the revolution and the turmoil of the civil war. He sounded feverish and was barely coherent, sweating bullets and breathing heavily. It was at this point that Greg, mild-mannered man that he was, up and crossed his T's and dotted his I's. They were headed in the same direction, at least for now, and you seem a reasonably intelligent fellow, not to mention you're under the weather, and it looks like you have a bad knee, he did, and probably should be left alone. It is fair to suppose that you were among those directly or indirectly involved in bringing about the changes that made our life in the land of our birth not only difficult, but actually impossible. Thank you so much for that. Running away from the tides of persecution and destruction is what my people historically thrive on, as is well known. Thank you for perpetuating that cycle dunderhead. And with that, he spits in the gent's eyes thickly and forcefully, whereupon this Yuri, his name just came to me, he introduced himself to us at the beginning of our journey as Yuri Borisovich. Yuri Borisovich, Urabors. This Yuri slaps Greg in the face hard. I got so scared I almost peed myself, seeing the two men have a go at each other, one being my tender-hearted and fragile brother, the other a soldier who could have been armed for all I knew, and who was big enough to strangle Greg with his bare hands. This Yuri could have. The fight that ensued was quickly quenched by Father and Chatterbox Ben, so the two men figured they'd take it outside. Actually, my Greg dragged the limping lieutenant bodily. A quarter an hour later, Greg returned with a black eye and a fat lip. Yuri did not return at all. Greg told us that Yuri went looking for another compartment, but what Greg actually did was push him off the speeding train in the middle of the night. Can you believe it? Is this how you start your journey to a new land? You bump someone off? I was scared senseless. Nothing left of our fellow traveler but his coat, cap, and patent leather sac de voyage. Greg said he'd come to pick up his things, but naturally he never did. Much to everyone's surprise, it wasn't a murder. Yuri, a survivor to end all survivors, lived. Some people. That's the historical part of the book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.
Well, I'm happy to open the floor for questions.
Novel's language and the themes that it covers sound very much cinematic, which can be understood also as it's partially autobiographical and from your screenwriting background. Have at any point during the writing of the novel or now you thought of a film adaptation and what it could look like?
It wouldn't be bad. I guess filming in Moscow is out of the question, but then there is stock footage of the Moscow White House being shelled, and those things can be done in Europe. I've never approached anyone yet. The book just came out, basically, but it's totally cinematic, and one of the sort of malicious pleasures that I indulged in was creating movie plots, non-existing movie plots for the director to describe, for the director's sister to describe for the guy who interviews him. And some are short, others are not so short, others are reworking of old Odysseus among the with his friends in Cyclops cave story transplanted into Red Hook. Others are more elaborate literary scenarii when I describe in great detail the Wild Magic Skin movie that the director supposedly made. So there are those moments that could be a great movie. This directed by, let's say, Francois Assayas for one, or maybe lesser lights. We'll see.
Who would play, I'm sorry to follow up, who would play your protagonist in that?
Mark, the guy, no idea. I don't really know that.
Do you have an actor for any of central characters? Greg Davis, for example.
Greg Davis, no idea. I watch movies so rarely these days. The guy who was in, he's a director and has a Broadway play now, and he did a movie about two guys traveling to Europe visiting concentration camps.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I could see him as Mark, but maybe Mark is in his early 30s, so he could be a good Mark. He could be a decent Mark. The bad guy, I don't know who's available anymore. They're dying like flies. Those
Well, we can use dead actors as well
dead actors can be used these days with AI, sure.
in this production.
Yeah, in this production. Yes, because there are a lot of dead and maimed.
Scary times.
Yeah, I was trying to shy away from presenting. Mikhail Shishkin once told me, Mikhail always appreciated my work, even way back, and he always kind of compliment me on how dense it is and how layered it is. But he always said it's like the boat that is about to capsize because you don't have enough girlfriends there and you don't have enough parents there in your stories. And it's a beautiful observation, which could probably be taken a level higher and. Sort of you can kind of theorize and do a little bit of putting things in a larger framework work, which I think I did here because they're talking about fate, they're talking about free will versus determinism, they're talking about good and evil, they're talking about all these good things, but also there are parents here, and I was trying to stay away from presenting parents as mumbling fools, like it's all done quite a bit, be it, I don't know, in Fellini, Amarcord, they're like silly, or maybe, and also they're always not entirely socialized. If they're Seinfeld family, they are ridiculously Jewish and live in Florida and wear white sneakers. If it's on the other side of the pond, Cadillacs early movie, До свидания, мальчики, Goodbye Boys, they're also very Yiddish and not as Sovietized as the next generation. I was trying to avoid that. Plus, Starik Rostov is not necessarily your smartest person, or King Lear, a holy fool. So these guys are always kind of presented as a little in a sort of buffoonish type of way. I was trying to avoid that. My parents of my guy are totally socialized. The father runs a successful business, the mother is a doctor, but there is still whatever comedy there is, it comes quite a bit from dialogue with the parents. So I couldn't really avoid comical parents stereotype, much as I tried.
Thank you. Please. Alan.
I have more, but I will open up the room.
Please,
Okay.
there's room for more.
Well, it seems that the theme of cycle and like how life is cyclical in a way seems to be, I don't know, just from this passage, very deeply entrenched, and from your antagonist being the literal cycle in itself.
Yeah.
What attracts you so much in the cyclical nature or structure of life?
Well, quite a few stories are cyclical. There is a relative order in the beginning. You show a shot of the building among other buildings, and then behind the curtains, there is an illicit love affair, like in Hitchcock's Psycho. For instance, first you see houses upon houses, but one house, something's happening now. And it is hopefully restored by the end of the book. So every story starts with disruption of order, and then it goes through a bit of chaos, and the order is restituted. So my book is a bit open-ended. You don't really know what's happening, except that the guy's life is. Someone asked me, Henrik Baron, the retired Slavic scholar, asked me at the White Rabbit presentation, but do they live at the end? And my answer was, yes, they do, but not for long. So I guess you have both. But it's a cheerful book, even though there's pile of corpses. Andrei Codrescu, who was one of the Romanian poet and American Romanian poet and teacher and radio personality and novelist, asked me first. I mean, of course, he says you're doing a Russian book. What Russian book can do without the devil character? And it turns out that not that many. I mean, other than Gogol, Dostoevsky, Bulgakov, and maybe
Tolstoy can do without devil character.
he can.
Can?
Yeah,
Doesn't?
he doesn't have one. The last book, which came out posthumously, Leonid Leonov's book, Pyramida, has sort of otherworldly characters, including maybe the bad one. Not that I read the book, but I kind of know that it's there because Paramonov talks about it. But, yes, I know it from hearsay. But
Actually, it's an angel.
yeah, it's an angel, former angel. So what was the question? Cyclical.
Cyclical.
Yeah, well, I guess life is cyclical. Once I mean, you read Lotman. He talks about the son being just another variation of the father, and so on and so forth. So it just, I mean, it goes back to Gilgamesh or all these things. I mean, it's one guy acting. So I guess there's something to be said about monologues, and the second part of the book is the entire sort of wall-to-wall monologue of the director's sister, talking about life in Russia, talking about kidnapping Stanislavski troop actor, prohibition, drugs, all these things that 1920s are known for. So there is a bit it's dialogical, I guess, because there are two characters, the young guy and the director or his sister. So I it's not all that I mean, I was after reading proofs and copy edits and dealing with all that multiple times. I started reading Flaubert's Sentimental Education. First time in maybe 30 years, I was doing it online, and it took forever for some reason. It's a great book. It's very fragmented, and it also recounts events he was writing in the late 60s. He talks about French Revolution 1848, and I was sort of immodestly trying to compare my description of the coup. Actually, there is a full chapter on the White House attack and the Amon people stopping you everywhere, and life kind of slowing to stopping. So the guy was like had to stay inside, and so did his girlfriend. But so there is a chapter about that.
But does it affect the narrative?
It does not affect the
It's
narrative.
sort of
It just, yeah.
a side dish.
True. Nothing much affects the narrative. They tell that female presence, I mean, maybe it's old school 80s, where they say that female presence kind of retards the flow of the epic. Like whenever Aeneas gets involved with Dido, he doesn't do much, but spend time with her. Much to my relief, nothing like this happens here, because the girlfriends of the main character propel the narrative forward. They don't do anything to retard it in any way. They bring in other stuff that would normally not be. There would be no way to introduce it into the book. For instance, my guy was dating an aspiring independent film maker, and so that gave me a chance to talk about New York independent film scene in the 80s, 90s. The guy dates an Albanian co-worker who's crazy about modern art. So there's quite a bit of gallery hopping in Soho and in Williamsburg in the book. So they kind of are agents of bits of the novel that normally would have no place in it.
Yes.
I had a brief question detailing just the passage you were reading. It seems like the main, as you say, the main bad guy is feverish. He's barely coherent as he's talking about like ostensibly the malicious deeds he's done. It's almost a subversion of the trait of like the main villain, who's always in at least Western films and literature very composed, like eerily composed. What was the process behind this?
It could have very well been the act, because I mentioned someplace that the devil is the ultimate actor. In fact, my guy in the book, his very first play that he sees that he goes to see in New York was the second greatest entertainer in the world. And it's a one-man play with Dick Shawn in it, the actor who was Hitler in the producers, Mel Brooks producers. So that was the first play I saw, and so he was the second greatest entertainer. It promenades theater on 70th Street, and the Broadway was our first theater experience in New York. God is the first, the main greatest entertainment in the world, and the narrator says, "Not devil, mind you, no slouch in flamboyance, literal flamboyant theatrics, but the God Almighty." So devil certainly vies for, and the book is fairly fairly theatrical there. You know, the main character goes to see Moscow plays a lot, or seeing description of Moscow plays there. It's a bit encyclopedic in that way, in that modest way. So the devil is the trickster, and it could have been assumed. He's sort of like Beetlejuice. You don't know whether he's for real or not. It was not certainly a real fever that he was running. He could give anyone a fever, but not himself.
So if there is no more formal questions, I suggest that we'll move to informal conversation with the author. That can happen around the table with books. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.